All right, welcome to the Managing Madrid podcast. It's the post-game show for the 1966 European Cup final, recorded some decades later. And fitting, this is a historical segment. We haven't done one in a while. And it's fitting that we chose this one, I think, because it cemented Gento's legacy. And, Matt and I did a podcast about Gento the day he passed, I think it was. That night it was a Thursday, and we spoke about him a little bit. And now that we were going to do a historical segment, why not revisit the 1966 European Cup finals? That's what we're going to do today. Matt Wiltsey is here with me. Matt, if I'm counting correctly, I believe this is the 24th historical segment we've done.
Wow.
Yeah, it's more than I thought it was, for sure. Like I suppose we tackled quite a bit of them during the first wave of COVID when we were all at home, but. We've done a few now of like the 50s and 60s era. Like we did the loss to Benfica in the 62 final. We did the game against Manchester United in the 67-68 season. We did the 7-3 win against Frankfurt in the final. This one was the most difficult one to digest from a broadcast standpoint.
Yeah. Normally, I'm always an advocate for telling the listeners to check this game out. This one's worth it. Like a really fun watch. But this particular match, the broadcast was just so poor that I don't recommend that. Maybe the second half. I think you and I both agreed that the second half, I don't know what changed. I don't know how it was a little bit darker and you could actually see the difference between the two jerseys. But it just overall the game wasn't that great. My only recommendation would be to check out the Real Madrid goals because they were phenomenal.
Yeah, I would I was tempted to actually send the link out to our patrons and also all of our listeners and say, hey, if you want to follow along with the game we're going to talk about today, here's the link. We'll watch it. Because we've done that in the past and people really appreciate that. Like, because, if we're going to talk about a game that they haven't seen before, they want to go back and watch it. I didn't with this one, although I was tempted to, because after I saw the broadcast, I was like, I think what you said is true. I think you can go back and watch the goals. We did the hard part for you. We'll basically tell you all the boring stuff that you need to know, the context. We'll probably talk about some more big picture stuff as well surrounding this game. But like the footage itself that we had was actually, it was a broadcast from Real Madrid TV, which on the bottom it says Centenario. So I assume it was done in 2002 or something that they had done and they were doing like some special segment. It's annoying though. My gripe with this is that, first of all, I'm thankful that they did this because maybe we wouldn't have had this footage if it wasn't for them. So thank you. If you were to do it again, rewind the tape, they were actually, if you listen carefully, they're speaking over the broadcast, the original broadcast. So you can hear like slight commentary in the background of the actual footage, and they're just talking over. They're not commentating; they're just having casual conversation. And I think the problem with that was that because you couldn't see the jersey numbers, you couldn't differentiate. Like that's part of the reason why I think this will be a quicker episode, because we can't go like break down like minute by minute and say like Amancio did this or Gento did this. It's like you can't. It's because it's hard to, you can't really see the jersey number. You can guess. I can guess like, who had the ball. I can guess if it's on the right, if it's someone dribbling down the middle, probably Amancio. If it's someone who has the ball at left back, it's probably Sanchez. You can guess all these things, but it's not 100% definitive. The least they could have done is at least commentate like who the players were. They started to do that a little bit in the second half, but it was hard to decipher. And I think that's part of the reason why I wouldn't recommend watching it. Also because the screen wasn't like a wide screen, but it seemed like it was cut off, like a part of it was cut off, like you couldn't see the whole picture. Like that changed a little bit randomly, like during the second half. And also we're not sure if we actually got the entire first half, right? We think some of the first half was missing from the footage. We don't know because there's no minutes and it just felt shorter. But
yeah. I mean, I'll try and give us the listeners some background just on the starting 11 as I could decipher it from just websites online that had it, but. I think the formation was wrong in a lot of the websites online. So it was closer to more like a 3-5-2 or a 3-4-3 at times. The three at the back were Pachin, De Felipe, and Sanchez Senior. And then Zoko was kind of like a stopper role. So he would sometimes drop in as a center back, but more as like a defensive mid. Piri and Martin Velasquez were in the middle. Sarina and Hento were out wide, and Hento was 32 years old at this point, still fast as hell. And this, obviously, as you mentioned, Keon, was his sixth and final European Cup. And then Grosso and Amancio were the two up top.
And it should be noted, like, this is a very iconic lineup in a lot of ways, because this is the first time they had to go into a Champions League final without one of Di Stefano or Puskás. And so this was in some ways uncharted territory. Gento is the spiritual leader of the team, and he's still very good. And, you know, this is the Yeye era. And it's a little bit unclear kind of where the Yeye era begins and ends, partly because, you know, like, to me, it kind of starts after 1964. And the reason I say that is because, like, before 1964, you still had a lot of these players, obviously. So, like, you still had Araquistain, who was the goalkeeper, Pachin, Zoko, Serena, Amancio, Manuel Velasquez. I wrote all these guys. These guys were there before 1964. And then after, a bunch of the other ones, like Pedro de Felipe, Emmanuel Sanchez, Jose Piri, all of these guys, Ramon Grosso, these guys arrived after 1964. So there's not like one period of time where all the Yeyes were all together and it made sense to call it that era. To me, it started kind of after 1964, partly because that's when they started to really play without Di Stefano and Puskás, and that's when they started to they won the European Cup without them, and that's, to me, where like the era kind of begins.
Yeah, I was actually after the game reading one of the articles Christopher McCormick had written about this era, and it's actually funny. He had the photo in there of, it was actually a few days before this final in 1966 when Gento is surrounded by all the kind of new young Spaniards, this new generation with they had wigs on, which kind of matched the Beatles haircut, and that's where the Yeyes come from, is because it was named after a Beatles song, and they all had that haircut, and it was during that era. And so funnily enough, it's probably, like, in terms of just Spanish culture, whether or not it probably started before that, like you mentioned, but in terms of just actually being recognized as the Yeye era, it was just before that, or after the 1966 final. And
well, the day after was so after they win the final, they all pose and they all look like the Beatles. They have the shaggy hair, they're all hipster, yeah. And then they post I think it was Marca actually who actually posted the picture the day after of them, and that's when it was like, okay, these guys are the
yeah. So I think it should also be noted that this was an all Spanish starting 11, and because at that time foreign players were no longer allowed, so guys like Puskás and Di Stefano wouldn't even be able to play on this team.
Well, this is kind of, in some ways, almost like the Quinta de Buitre of its time, right? Because partly because of that rule you mentioned, but also partly because Di Stefano and Puskás had declined. So even before, they had to, Miguel Munoz had basically banished Puskás like a couple years before this. They lost to Inter a couple years before this, and Di Stefano was in and out of the lineup. He was starting to get benched, and he was complaining, "You don't like your tactics." And Miguel Munoz basically showed him the door. He went to Espanyol, and that's kind of how his Real Madrid career dwindled. But it was just kind of a matter of, like, Miguel Munoz looking at his team, and he's like, I gotta basically bring up all these Spanish players and young players, and that's kind of the way Di Stefano himself years later kind of promoted the Quinta de Buitre. So it is, like, as much as the broadcast sucked, and like we can complain about the boring game and all that stuff, but like I really feel like if we were around for that time, like if we were watching this in live time, this would have meant a lot. And I feel like when Serena scores the winning goal, we would have been losing our shit, because if you think about it, like, this was 6 years removed from their last European Cup. They hadn't won it in years. They made the final a couple times, but they lost. or was it once? I can't remember. But they got to the 66 final and they're down 1-0, and all of a sudden you're like, oh man, here we go again. We finally got here, but we're down a goal. It's kind of like, in a way, like a poor man's La Decima, or like a or like a Mihatovic goal, where there's like a drought and then you get the winning goal and it's like delirium. So I thought it would have been really cool to actually live through and see this.
Well, I definitely like. There's parallels to La Decima, but even more, even I think the big difference versus La Decima, at least for me, was Partizan were much the better team in the first half, like far better. And when they scored early in the second half, and they deserved to go ahead. Like I was actually kind of surprised at how poor Real Madrid were. Like they couldn't string more than two passes together in the final third in that first half. Just everything was Partizan, and they had the best opportunities. They were pulling off quick throw-ins. They were just able. They were running at Real Madrid, like they were getting shots off. I felt like Madrid. I don't know. They just couldn't. There was no connection. There was no. It wasn't like watching Di Stefano, Puskas, and Hento, because when those three got the ball in the final third, like they never screwed up. They always just did something magical and made it look so easy. And at least in the first half, you didn't have that. Like guys were dribbling into players. They were loose control, sloppy passes, and like Madrid looked toothless in the attack. And it wasn't until they got scored on that they really started to come alive. But to your point, like if we were watching this game live, yeah, it would have been edge of your seat stuff, because you would have been freaking out at how much Partizan were dominating. They go up. You're thinking to yourself, oh my God, like how do we come back from this? But it was in typical Real Madrid fashion, a remontada after going a goal down. It just awoke them, and they started creating history.
I was gonna say I wrote an article a couple of days ago about Real Madrid's Champions League odds, and I made the point to like bring up all the Champions Leagues we've won in the past that we haven't played well or we haven't been good that season. I should have shoehorned this one in too as a game where, like, do you think this puts into perspective how good Di Stefano and Puskas's era was? Like, because I felt like if you rewind this to 1957, 1958, 59, 60, it felt like the tactics were superior, but also just the flow of the game was better. Di Stefano, like, he just, to me, that's just a testament to also Di Stefano and Puskas were just ahead of their time. And Gento too, like, again, like, I'm not going to separate Gento from that discussion because he was one of the big three, but like, wow, that 50s team was really ahead of its time. And you can kind of see it when you watch a game in 1966, when football really hasn't changed that much. Let's be clear, it's not like it's evolved by 1966. There's just a bunch of dumb shit still happening. But it really puts into perspective how great Di Stefano and Puskas were. What's up, YouTube? This is Kiyan Sobhani. Hope you enjoyed that clip. The full episode is actually on your podcast app. It's for free. Just search Managing Madrid wherever you get your podcasts. You'll see it. We do these historical segments from time to time. Usually it's during international breaks, or specifically when there's not much going on during the international break. So if there's a lot of Real Madrid players playing, we will not do them. But if it's a case like this one where we only have the South American contingent go down to South America, we will not really cover the international break as closely, and we will do historical games. There is a good chance that the historical game that you want covered has already been done by us. So if there's one era or one game specifically you're looking for, comment on this video and I will send you the direct link to it if it exists. And if it doesn't exist, we'll file it, we'll take note, and we'll do it in the future. I promise you, we'll put it in the list. We have a long list to go through, to be fair, so it might not be immediate, but we're open to ideas. We want to know what you guys are interested in. What eras did you miss? What eras would you like us to watch and revisit and talk about? We are very open to that. And as always, if you want to go deeper down the rabbit hole with us, patreon.com/managingmadrid, where you can get all kinds of bonus content, including the Loan Tracker on Tuesdays, the Mailbag on Thursdays, as well as Champions League post-game shows. And you know we got a couple big ones coming up. So if you want access to all that for as little as $2 a month, patreon.com/managingmadrid. And we will see you inside the Real Madrid family. See you there.